I was the woman everyone envied. A stable marriage, a beautiful home, and a husband, Daniel, who never forgot anniversaries or birthdays. On the surface, it all sparkled. But behind closed doors, silence grew louder every day. Daniel had become distant, consumed by his work. I understood. He was building something for us, but somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like part of that us. When we hired Jacob, it was purely practical. Daniel had suggested it after I complained about managing everything alone. Jacob was young, polite, hardworking. Nothing about him seemed out of place. He moved with quiet efficiency, always respectful. But after a few weeks, I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way he listened, how he remembered my coffee order without being told twice. His presence brought a kind of energy the house hadn't felt in months. It started small. One morning, I complimented his cooking, he smiled, and there was a pause, like we both noticed something we weren't supposed to. I brushed it off. Days passed, and we shared more casual moments. Quick chats in the hallway, him offering to carry groceries, a joke here and there. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing that crossed a line. But still, something was forming. Daniel was barely home. Always away on business trips or stuck at late meetings. His messages became fewer, the calls shorter. I would eat dinner alone while Jacob cleaned quietly in the background. The loneliness was unbearable. Not because I didn't have anyone around, but because the one person I needed had emotionally checked out. One rainy evening, I found myself sitting at the dining table, sipping tea. Jacob walked in to clean up, but paused when he saw me. I don't remember what we talked about, just that I laughed. A real laugh, one I hadn't felt in months. He looked at me and said, "It's nice to see you happy." I froze. He didn't mean it as a flirt. But I couldn't stop thinking about those words for the rest of the night. I began to wonder if it was wrong to enjoy his company. Was I betraying my husband just by feeling seen? I didn't have the answer, but I did know one thing. Something in me was awakening. Not passion, not desire. At least not yet, but the craving to be acknowledged, appreciated, even just looked at. Jacob, unknowingly or not, filled that space. Guilt started to creep in, but I justified it. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just talking, laughing, feeling alive. Yet I knew deep down that feelings don't just stay still. They grow. And if they grow unchecked, they become something else. Something dangerous. I told myself I had control, that nothing would happen. But control is fragile when you're starved for affection. And I, unknowingly, had already opened a door that wouldn't be easy to close. The next few days blurred into one long stretch of stolen glances and careful words. I told myself to maintain distance, to keep things professional. But emotions don't follow rules. They sneak in through the smallest cracks, and soon, even silence between us began to speak volumes. I started looking forward to his presence, timing my coffee breaks to align with his chores. It was subtle, deliberate, and entirely wrong. One afternoon, he brought me a plate of fruit without being asked. I thanked him, and our eyes met, too long, too close. He looked away first, murmuring something about needing to mop the hallway. My heart pounded in my chest like I'd done something terrible, though nothing had happened. But I knew then that something had shifted, and it wasn't just on my side. A few days later, while Daniel was on another work trip, I found Jacob waiting by the kitchen counter, hesitating with a question. He asked if I was okay, said I seemed distant lately. His concern felt genuine, and in that moment, I couldn't lie. I admitted I hadn't been feeling like myself, that I felt invisible. He said he noticed and that I deserved better. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Soft, careful, almost too understanding. The air between us felt different now, thick, unspoken. I told myself to walk away. Instead, I stayed. We talked longer than we should have. We stood too close. When I reached for my cup and our hands brushed, I didn't pull away. Neither did he. That accidental touch lingered in my mind long after I went to bed. The kiss happened 2 days later. It was evening, quiet, and we were in the same room again, too close with too many words unsaid. I don't remember who moved first, only that it was slow, hesitant, and filled with silent questions. And then it just happened. A kiss, soft, guilty, and over within seconds. But that single moment shattered the boundary completely. I pulled back, heart racing, mind spinning. He apologized immediately, saying he shouldn't have. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because I wasn't angry, I was scared. Scared of what we'd done. Scared of how much I wanted to do it again. I went to my room and cried that night, not out of shame, but because I realized how far I'd drifted from who I used to be. For the next few days, I avoided him. Barely spoke. I needed to convince myself that it meant nothing, that it was a mistake I wouldn't repeat. But my heart wouldn't listen. I kept replaying it, obsessing over it. And every time I looked at my husband's untouched side of the bed, I felt more confused. I wanted to believe I was still in control, that I could pretend it never happened. But pretending only works for so long. Eventually, reality walks through the door. And mine was closer than I thought. Daniel came back earlier than expected. No calls, no texts, just the sound of his car in the driveway while I was in the kitchen talking to Jacob. I hadn't seen him in days, and I'd finally allowed myself to speak to him again. We weren't doing anything wrong in that moment. No touching, no flirtation, but we were close, too close, and the way we looked at each other said everything that words hadn't. When Daniel walked in, I saw the shift in his expression the moment his eyes landed on us. His gaze flicked between us, narrowed, and then stayed locked on me. I opened my mouth to speak, to explain something I hadn't prepared for, but he beat me to it.
He didn't yell.
He didn't curse. He just asked one question, sharp and cold. "What's going on here?" Jacob tried to excuse himself, but Daniel stepped aside, blocking the exit. His calm tone was more terrifying than if he had shouted. I tried to explain it was nothing, that we were just talking, but my voice shook, and I knew even I didn't believe it. Daniel looked at me like he didn't recognize me. The silence that followed was suffocating. He turned to Jacob and told him to leave the house. Not later. Not tomorrow.
Now.
Jacob didn't argue. He grabbed his things and left without another word, not even a glance back. That door closed, and so did the last piece of whatever comfort I thought I had. Then Daniel looked at me again, this time with eyes that were full of betrayal. He didn't say a word. He just walked past me and into our room. The next few hours felt endless. I tried knocking, calling his name, but he refused to speak to me. The pain in his silence was louder than anything else. He packed a small bag the next morning. When I asked where he was going, he just said, "Away from here. I can't look at you right now." Then he walked out, leaving behind nothing but the weight of his absence. I collapsed in the hallway. I didn't cry for Jacob. I cried because I knew I had broken something sacred. I had betrayed the man who once looked at me like I was his whole world. And no matter how much I wanted to explain, there was no way to undo what had been done. The house felt empty in a way I had never known. Not just without Daniel, but without myself. I didn't recognize the woman who had made those choices. I wasn't proud. I wasn't justified. I was simply lost. Everything I thought I had under control had spiraled into disaster, and now I had nothing left but the echo of my own choices. Weeks passed without a word from Daniel. I tried reaching out, calls, texts, even emails, but he never responded. I didn't blame him. Trust, once shattered, doesn't rebuild easily. I spent my days in silence, replaying everything. Not just the kiss, but every moment that led to it. I tried to justify it to myself, but all those reasons, loneliness, neglect, emotional void, felt weak against the reality of betrayal. Friends noticed the change. I lied, saying Daniel was away for work, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was unraveling. The nights were the worst. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, haunted by everything I had thrown away in a moment of weakness. Jacob never reached out either. It was as if he'd vanished completely, and maybe that was for the best. He was a mistake I had to own alone. Then one afternoon, Daniel returned. No warning. No message. Just walked in, calm but guarded. I stood frozen, unsure if I should apologize or explain. But he wasn't there for closure. He was there for his things. Clothes, files, books. He packed them methodically while I stood helpless. I asked him to sit, to talk, to give me 5 minutes. He hesitated, then finally agreed. What followed wasn't yelling. It wasn't anger. It was heartbreak. He told me he loved me, still did, but love wasn't always enough. He said he couldn't understand how I could open a part of myself to someone else, even if it was just emotional at first. He felt replaced, discarded. Like I didn't fight for us when things got hard. And he was right. I didn't. I let silence grow between us, and instead of breaking it, I ran from it. I apologized. Not just for what happened with Jacob, but for letting our marriage erode. I told him I missed him, that I was willing to fight, to rebuild. But Daniel looked at me with tired eyes and said something I'll never forget. You waited until after the damage was done to start caring. He wasn't cruel. He was just done. He left that evening. And that was it. No dramatic goodbye. No parting kiss. Just the end of what once was everything. I spent the next days coming to terms with it. The consequences weren't just losing him. They were about losing myself. The guilt didn't fade. It became part of me. A reminder of what happens when you seek comfort in the wrong place instead of confronting the cracks within. Time moved forward, even when I didn't want it to. Eventually, I started rebuilding, not for him, not for a second chance, but because I had to. I learned to live with regret. It doesn't vanish, but it does teach. And what it taught me was this: betrayal doesn't always begin with an action. Sometimes, it begins the moment you stop choosing the person you promised to stand beside. I stopped choosing Daniel long before that kiss. And by the time I realized it, I had already lost him.